historians and London institutions. We've got 3 great speakers. I'll introduce them, I think, for each of their papers, and we're going to run on the order that's on the programme. So to start with, we have John Beckett here, who is Professor of English Regional History at the University of Nottingham and was previously Director of the Victoria County History. And John's paper is entitled Women Historians and the Victoria County History, 1902 to 1950.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. And I'm going to be talking about 115 women, but you'll be pleased to know that I won't be mentioning each of them in turn. I spent 5 years as Director of the VCH between 2005 and 10, and in that period I did a whole series of pieces of research, but one of them was on the women historians of the VCH, all of whom operated, as it were, before the First World War. The VCH itself was founded in 1899, and between 1902 and 1915, approximately 120 women worked for the organisation. It was not at that stage part of the IHR, of course, which hadn't been founded, nor was it part of the University of London. But initially it was in fact a private enterprise sponsored by the publishing company of Archibald Constable. So strictly speaking, I think it would be accurate to say that I'm talking about women who worked for the VCH, who were women who worked as historians in London rather than as professional historians working within the London collegiate structure. But also, I think, would like to start with the idea and to pick up something that Laura said just now, which is a quotation here from Professor Maxine Berg back in the 1990s, in which she refers to the women who worked for the VCH, and at the end of this quote, as you'll see, she comments that this was not part of her remit for that particular paper, and I hope that in what I'm saying today I can perhaps change that unknown into a bit more of a known. Okay, so these are some of the questions I'm asking, not in any particular order, but I hope you will find that we get through some of them at least in the next few minutes. Now, the VCH was founded, you won't be surprised to hear, by a male, and the first editor was Arthur Doubleday, shown on the left on this slide. And Doubleday formed committees, always male committees, and he contacted subject specialists and local historians who were equally male. But the project quite rapidly ran into difficulties because the financial model that had been established by Archibald Constable required the VCH to produce 20 volumes per annum. Come on, I managed to get away with saying that with a straight face. And I have to say that this didn't really work. And of course you'll realise that it was because all of these male contributors failed to submit on time. Now the plan was that each county would have 4 volumes. This is just a kind of random shot, just to give you an idea of this concept of 4 volumes in a series. The first volume was always to include, well, this helps, this slide should help you just to get a grip of how the VCH worked from the beginning, where you start with this idea of county sets. Volume 1 of general essays, natural history, archaeology, doomsday book. Volume 2 on another range of general subjects, and then 2 volumes, at least in the early days before everything got out of control, 2 volumes of topography, which you'll see there, volumes 3 and 4. And this was the plan, and this was the idea of how it would work on a county by county basis. the volumes 1. So you never get the concept here of every county having a volume 1, 2, 3 and 4. But I'm talking about the 1s, then the 2s, then the 3s, then the 4s. If you don't get it, don't worry about it. I'll try and explain again later. But in the county sets, the volumes 1 were full of natural history. In fact, I can confidently say that the BCH has published more natural history than it's probably published any other subject, because they managed to produce volumes 1 for 27 counties before the First World War. And only one of the people writing on this was a woman, and that was, as you can see from the slide, Beatrice Lindsay of Girton. So women played very little role in this first part, the natural history, which was largely written by specialists from places like the Natural History Museum, the British Museum. You'd expect that. But then the section that followed that was usually on Romano-British materials, and here was the work of Marjorie Taylor, who was a Somerville student, and she researched on this over the period of the first decade of the 20th century, and she wrote the Romano-British essay for Shropshire 1 and Oxfordshire 1, and subsequently she was a luminary of the Society for the Promotion of Roman Studies and appointed CBE in 1948. The third name I picked out there is Ella Armitage, who wrote on earthworks in Yorkshire and was, again, in this case, a Newnham scholar from the 1870s. Subsequently wrote a book on Norman castles. So that's the volume 1. We now come to volume 2. Under the 1903 scheme, which was a replacement for the 1902 scheme, which was a replacement for the 1901 scheme, largely because nobody could really agree quite what was going to happen. But nevertheless, by 1903, this is what they'd come down to. And really, by 1903, they'd agreed that volumes 1 would cover everything up to Doomsday, and volume 2 would cover everything after that. And so it's to be ecclesiastical. You can see the list there. They didn't get very far with the feudal baronage, which they soon abandoned. They weren't too good on family history and heraldry, because nobody was too sure about what that was. Persons eminent in art, literature and science was extremely contentious and soon dropped. And that left, of course, ancient and modern sport, which you will fully appreciate was not games like football and rugby and tennis. It was, of course, hunting, shooting and fishing. Because you must remember who the audience is. So this was where they got to, and this was where the volumes 2 took them. And so volumes 2 were full of general essays. Any of you ever looked in a volume 2? It's very well worthwhile. There's a lot of material in them, even if the interpretation isn't quite what you'd anticipate today. But there is a lot in them. And this was where the influence of women became extremely important. The first editor was Arthur Doubleday, who only, as far as I can see, employed men, as far as he could. But in 1902, by which time the BCH was already about 40 volumes behind, and it actually only produced 2 volumes, so you can see that the speed was a bit of a problem. William Page, Dr. William Page, was brought on board as joint editor, and he joined the BCH at that time, and he in fact remained as editor until he died in 1934. And Page was a record agent. He had had a lot of experience of working with the public records, particularly Public Record Office in Chancery Lane, and it was his idea to bring on board a whole range of new people who would do different jobs. And the first one was Elizabeth Hodge. There she is. Very difficult to find in the BCH records because she's always known as Sister Elspeth. Every reference to her is that, because she was a member of a religious order. Once you discover that she did have a name, you can start to put links to her. She was a Somerville scholar, and she went on to write all sorts of things, as you can see from this. And she also introduced the VCH a woman called, now I've put her down here as Amy Audrey Locke, but I did see in something I was reading that she was known as Amy in London and Audrey at home in Winchester. Now I can't guarantee that that's actually the case. All I can say is I've referred to her consistently as Amy, simply because I can't know anything else. But she did all sorts of things, as you can see here. She had been at Somerville. She was recommended by Elizabeth Hodge, and she went on to do all of this kind of work. And indeed, it's fairly clear to me that Page had built up a repertoire of people that he knew, particularly in some of the Oxbridge colleges. So, this is Amy. This is Amy Locke, with a little book shown in the left-hand side, which, despite its title, is actually a biography of Amy, written 2 or 3 years ago by a lady who subsequently has died, I'm sorry to say. What comes next? Yes. Now these great women who were heads of Oxford colleges, Oxford particularly, these were some of William Page's advisors. They would tell him who they thought they had, who might work for him, and he would go and consult them. Elizabeth Wordsworth on the left, principal of Lady Margaret Hall, and Agnes Maitland, principal of Somerville, on the right. And they were undoubtedly his advisors. But he didn't only take in students. Some of the early this was Christine Burroughs, who was the assistant principal at St Hilda's, had to give up her VCH work when she took over as principal from her mother. I don't know if there's any sense of nepotism there in the case. But he also recruited not just students, he also recruited people who were staff members there. Beatrice Lees, Eleanor Lodge, Mary Bateson, who I'm sure many of you have heard of, a leading suffragist in the early 20th century, and a very well-known scholar, and Maud Sellers I picked up there, who also worked for the VCH for some time. All of these women went on to write history of their own, and indeed, I don't have time to deal with this today, but many of the VCH women were themselves scholars who, after their time at VCH, worked in various other areas and published in other areas. Some specialised in certain topics. This is Ethel Hewitt, who wrote to Page to say she'd like to work for the VCH, but she didn't know any Latin, and she thought that might rule her out, which, surprisingly, it doesn't appear to have done so. Instead, she had to write lots of things on industry and economic history. I don't know what her qualification for that was, but there we go. And when she hadn't got any work when she got no work from the VCH, she penned romantic historical biography, under which you could find her listed in the British Library catalogue. She was quite a live wire. And this slide simply gives you an idea of the numbers of women who were involved in this work. Many of them working on the social and economic history. These chapters were quite new, with very little definite economic social history before this time. And then some of them became sort of specialists working on these areas. But you can get an idea from this of the number of women who were involved. And there again, I pick up from that scene below just how many of them were involved in the social and economic history of VCH. However, Page's idea behind recruiting women to write these essays in the volumes 2 was to speed up the production of volumes 2 so that he got more volumes through the door so that the publisher didn't pull the plug. And that gave him time to think about what should be in volumes 3 and 4, the topographical volumes. Because here the problem was very straightforward, simple. No one had actually thought what we're going to put in the topographical volumes as opposed to what might be done and what the sources are. There was no quick fix for this, and this of course was where Page introduced a whole new way of doing things. Gosh, 5 minutes, very quick. What he did was, having had all of these women on board to write the essays for volumes 2, he then introduces a new way of doing things for volumes 3 and 4. Because what he discovers is that if every historian has got to go to the Public Record Office and work their way through the lists and indexes, by the time they've written their one parish study, it'll be 25 years on, and you'll still only have 4 volumes out. So he buys in, pays a lot of women to go and work daily in the PRO, just going through the lists, and then just finding out how many there should be, and making the famous slips of the VCH. He widens things up, he takes them all to a new office on Orange Street. These are some of the women involved, and their job initially was simply to work through the lists and make slips, famous slips that they are. Unfortunately, they upset a few people in the PRO, as you can see from this quote, because there were so many of them, and this assistant keeper writes to Page saying, "I'm sorry, we can't have this going on all the time." So this is one of the drawbacks. So then what happened, of course, was that Page realised that he could do a lot more with these very intelligent women than just listing and taking numbers. And so what happens next is that he starts to work on a system whereby they begin to draft the topographical accounts, and the topographical accounts are then overseen in the office in Orange Street. This is some of the women and what they were doing, and they produce an enormous amount of work, much of which sadly was never actually published. So the overall way in which this operated was quite simple. It was that he had a whole number of students and former members of staff. And this is Catherine Jamieson in 1904, just describing what it was like to be in the office. All of these people running around. They had to leave the PRO at 4:30 on the dot, and walk from the PRO on Chancery Lane, it takes 20 minutes, down to Orange Street, where they would practice what the VCH called sortation, a word not used by anybody else, sortation, in which you took all the slips, you put them into counties, into parishes, so that when somebody came along to write this, they would have all the slips together. It was done daily. You weren't allowed to go home until you'd finished. And so, this is what we get. We also get topographical supervisors being appointed. This is Lillian Redster, who was one of them, about who Joan Thirst wrote some years ago. And there were 5 or 6 of these, if not more. Now, just really to push on to I won't go in, I've got a lot more detail, so I won't talk about that. What I'd just sort of like to comment on in the last few minutes is who all these women were and where they came from. 16 of them, of 16 of the 115, certainly passed through the Oxford Honours School of Modern History. Amy Locke, who I referred to earlier, came from Winchester to Somerville and then into London. 16 of them from that route. Some of these are still quite well known women. Joyce Jeffreys Davis, who worked on the VCH London. Minnie Redden, who I know that Barron knows something about, but there were really quite a number of them. Many of them did not come through Oxford and Cambridge. Some came through other universities. Sarah Mel Hewish had a degree from Liverpool, and several had degrees from St Andrews. Yet others didn't have history backgrounds, some had classics, some had literature, and yet others had no qualifications at all. For example, was Martha Campbell, who come from Scotland, and who, as far as I can see, simply went through the old civil service exams, got a job in the civil service, was sent to the Public Record Office, finished what she'd done there, ended up with the VCH, and worked for them for a while until that finished as well. No, it didn't finish. She got married and gave the work up. Mostly they were trained on the job. Page reckoned it took 3 months to train a topographer, and quite a few seem to have passed through the classes run by Hubert Hall at the LSE, and quite a few of them, and I've got a whole list of those, in addition to which some worked contractually, some were paid by the job, others were actually employed in the office for a while. Mostly they were paid the same as men, which I won't say anything more about, but that does appear to be the case. That's probably, and not all of them were willing. I must tell you very briefly about Ada Hendy, who was offered work on Hampshire and who wrote to Page to say, I love this quotation, Miss Wilmot tells me you're prepared to offer me work on Hampshire. I'd be willing to accept it on the understanding that I can at once give it up if I hear of something better. You'll find that she wrote for several volumes of the Hampshire series, thus presumably proving that she couldn't find anything better in her view. Okay, so that's a sort of very brief run through all whom they were. Many of them went on to other work. I've got lots of details on those if anybody wants to know about any in particular. But it was an interesting project to go through, and I would say I don't want to give the impression that this was a wholly female world. It wasn't at all. William Page, I think, employed women because he saw them as good workers who would work to the deadlines he set. But they were not alone. There were many men working for the VCH, particularly in the work of architectural work. So that probably is as much as I should say at this stage before I'm hounded out by yet another piece of information. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
I'm pleased to introduce Linda Clark, who is an editor at the History of Parliament, where her research focuses on the 15th century, and the title of her paper is The Contribution of Women to the History of Parliament. Do you have a PowerPoint?
No, I don't. Sorry about that.
No, that's fine.
Thank you very much, Laura. I should say that I've spent my whole working life working on the history of Parliament, so whether that makes me qualified to talk about it or not, I don't know. So I'm going to talk about the contribution of women to the history of Parliament. The history of Parliament was the brainchild of Colonel Josiah Wedgwood, a maverick Labour backbencher. It emerged from his excessive pride in his forebears and veneration for the institution of Parliament. This year marks the centenary of the compilation by Wedgwood, who was an enthusiastic amateur historian, of 4 substantial volumes of biographical lists of the MPs for Staffordshire from the 13th to the 19th centuries. And that served as a basic model for a national history. In 1928, a petition to the Prime Minister from over 500 signatories urged the appointment of a select committee to prepare a complete record of the personnel and politics of the Parliament from 1264 to 1832. The committee, in its various incarnations in the early 1930s, made plans to place each of the different historical periods, quote, in the hands of the most competent historian on that period, on the understanding that he is to complete his volume within 5 years. This was like the BCH with the 1 year ambition. 5 years was, of course, completely impractical. Unlike the other committee members, Wedgwood generally regarded academic historians, whatever their gender, as dispensable, referring disparagingly to the likes of A.F. Pollard, Neal, Namier and Notestein as the trades union, and vociferously falling out with all of them at regular intervals. The History Goods project is littered with individuals whom he took up and then discarded. Women were among the most badly treated. The blind Canadian Kathleen Wood-Lee, fresh from completing her PhD at Cambridge, was led to believe that she would be given responsibility for a section of the history covering the late 14th century, and for that reason didn't seek permanent employment elsewhere. She eventually discovered, by chance, that her section had been handed over to other editors, and Wedgwood failed to pay her for the work she'd already done. Wedgwood himself took on the task of producing volumes covering Parliament between 1439 and 1509, for which he conscripted the help of a devoted and unpaid assistant, Anne Holt, who had studied history at St. Hugh's College, Oxford. In 1935, however, Anne Holt tendered her resignation because of his refusal to honour an unwritten agreement that the volumes they had worked on would appear under joint authorship. In a damaging memorandum, she questioned the wisdom of entrusting to Wedgwood overall supervision of the medieval sections. The management of such a great enterprise, she wrote, is essentially one for the experts. The first of the volumes, comprising biographies and an introduction, was published by HMSO, with Wedgwood named as sole author, quote, in collaboration with Anne Holt. Citations of the work rarely mention her, but in any case, she cannot be held responsible for provoking the highly critical response to the volumes. The review written by May McIsaac in the English Historical Review focused on Wedgwood's idiosyncratic introduction, replete with unverifiable hypotheses and anachronistic assumptions about the role and opinions of MPs and the way that Parliament functioned in the 15th century. It might be pointed out that May McIsaac was surely a contender to oversee a medieval section of the history, but so far as I know, she was never asked to do so. Wedgwood had assigned his niece, Veronica Wedgwood, that's C.B. Wedgwood, to work on the Civil War period, but she wisely decided to protect her own reputation as a serious historian and put some distance between them. During the war in 1940, a body of trustees drawn from both houses of Parliament was appointed to oversee the history. more as a defiant gesture of belief in the nation's survival and victory than because any work on the project could possibly commence in the near future. It was not until 1951, after Wedgwood's death, that the trust was placed on a sound financial footing and the project was relaunched. By demonstrating in his own volumes the limitations of the amateur, Wedgwood ensured that when the project was revived, it would be directed, researched and written by the professionals. And the trustees entrusted the planning and preparation of volumes to an editorial board of historians. Since 1964, under their guidance, 41 volumes of the history of the House of Commons have been published, covering 10 historical periods. That's a total of some 25.5 million words, 20,000 pages, 21,000 biographies, and 2,800 constituency articles. To this sum were added just last year 5 volumes devoted to the House of Lords from 1660 to 1715. Over time, the participation of women in this major project might have been expected to have increased on a steadily upward trajectory as more women gained university degrees and sought full-time employment in historical research, like their male contemporaries. But a graph showing the proportion of women to men engaged in the work of the History of Parliament would reveal a much less straightforward story, more of a roller coaster than a regular ascent up the mountain. And women have always been heavily outnumbered by men throughout the life of the organisation. In the 66 years since 1951, only 4 of the many trustees have been women. Baroness Betty Boothroyd, former Speaker, and Baroness Patricia Hollis, the historian of women in the 19th century in their own right, and Jackie Sharp and Philippa Tudor ex officio as clerks. As for the editorial board of distinguished historians, until 2016, only 4 of its members have been women. First and foremost, Dame Lucy Sutherland, who served on the board from 1967 to 1979, followed by Professor Caroline Barron, for nearly 20 years from 1988, Professor Pauline Croft from 1992 to 2010, and Professor Elaine Challis from 2010 to the present day. Since its inception in 1951, the history has had 4 directors, originally entitled secretaries to the editorial board, whose role is really that of chief executive. Of those 4, only one has been a woman. Valerie Cromwell was the 3rd person to take up this post. Her predecessors had successfully negotiated with the Treasury for members of staff on the history to receive remuneration on the same pay scales as lecturers in the University of London, and to be permitted to join the university's pension scheme. The only difference with academic staff elsewhere is that our pay scale stops short of the professorial level. The history staff set up its own small branch of the union, which was then the AUT, in affiliation with University College London. All this has meant that there's been no discrimination on the basis of gender. Equal treatment for men and women was guaranteed. A moderniser, Valerie Cromwell focused on improving the working conditions of the staff and promoting the work of the history at Westminster. Until her arrival, the staff had been housed in somewhat cramped conditions at 34 Tavistock Square, sharing the building with other organisations and prone to internecine fighting over desk space. When not at the Public Record Office, the British Library or archives around the country, research staff were mainly here in the library at the Institute. For the most part, they wrote their biographies and constituency surveys in longhand. And after the editorial process, these would be handed to diligent female secretaries to be typed up as clean copies for filing. As director, Valerie negotiated with the university for the history to lease its own exclusive premises in Woburn Square, introduced computers for all, and radically changed our working methods. In numerical terms, as contributors to the work of the history, women have always been heavily outnumbered by men, never totaling more than a third of the workforce, and in some publications figuring hardly at all. To give you extreme examples, only one of the 16 contributors to Roland Thorne's volumes, that's 1790 to 1820, was a woman, and only 1 in 12 in David Fisher's volumes for 1820 to 1832 was of this gender. For all the other sets of volumes on earlier historical periods, women made up a quarter or a third of the total number of contributors. Yet that said, it's clear that sometimes women punched above their weight by researching and writing a disproportionate number of articles, or by offering expertise in a particular area which was otherwise lacking. Rodney Sedgwick, on publishing his volumes for 1715 to 54, acknowledged the major contribution of Evelyn Cruikshank's, and Helen Miller's steady engagement in the research for the 16th century sections proved invaluable. The first woman to be appointed as editor of the section of the history was Evelyn Cruikshank's, who had previously worked on the Sedgwick and Henning volumes. While editor of the 1690 to 1715 section of the history, that's from 1971 until her retirement, she impressively also steered through an important innovation in the study of parliamentary institutions as a co-founder and first editor of the journal Parliamentary History, which since its first issue in 1982 has gone from strength to strength. On a personal note, I should say that my own experiences of employment on the history have been atypical. I joined the history 47 years ago in 1969, though when I did so, I viewed it as something I might like to do for a short while, before moving on to I don't know what. I've been doing research for a DPhil thesis at Oxford under the supervision of Gerald Harris, and began to look for gainful employment. Gerald suggested joining the late 14th and early 15th century section of the history under the editorship of Professor John Roskell. The section was in the doldrums. It had started in 1960, but the 4 excellent male research assistants had all moved on to posts in the universities of BCH, and most of the history's resources had been siphoned off for sections dealing with later historical periods. Roskell himself had a chair and major commitments at Manchester University, and didn't have the time to work on biographies himself. Nor was he well placed to fight for funds in London. He and the editorial board interviewed and appointed me, and for some time I was completely on my own, researching and writing biographies and surveys, which were packaged up, sent to Manchester for Professor Roskell to edit. Charles Keightley and Margaret May joined the section for a while before moving on, and then by great good fortune in 1975, we were able to recruit Carol Rawcliffe, who stayed with me at the History until the publication in 1992 of our 4-volume set. The usual gender balance had been totally reversed. Between us, Carol and I wrote over 2,600 of the biographies and surveys, amounting to over 75% of the contents of volumes. Carol prepared Roskell's introductory survey for publication. I did the appendices. The two of us coped with 4 lots of page proofs as they went through the press. As a consequence, our names were put on 3 of the volumes as co-editors with Professor Roskell. Carol's contribution to the section was immense, and I'm enormously grateful to her for an energising blend of collaboration and competition, the tireless exploration of new source material, and her refusal to countenance sloppy writing. It was planned that the two of us would jointly edit the next section of the History, but by then she was ready to take up new challenges in the history of medicine and moved on to UEA, the chair, numerous publications, and an enviable reputation as lecturer and teacher. It may be relevant to today's discussions to note that I am atypical in being the first of only 2 members of the History staff ever to take maternity leave, which I did twice in the early 1980s. In the 21st century, the History has moved on in several respects, with the help of women. As I mentioned, the first set of volumes to focus on the House of Lords was published last year under the editorship of Ruth Paley. The published volumes on the House of Commons have all been made available online via the History's website, and the organisation has benefited from the arrival of bright young female historians, all with doctorates, of course. Emma Peplow, our communications officer, has encouraged us to blog and tweet, and fresh emphasis has been placed on encouraging school children to take an interest in Parliament and its history. Emma Peplow and Priscilla Pivato, working in association with the British Library, have piloted the creation of a sound archive of British politics since 1945 by interviewing former MPs about their experiences. Over 50 such interviews have been recorded. Nevertheless, and strangely, there remains an extreme gender imbalance in those employed in the core work of the History. Of the 21 people engaged in the 5 sections currently in progress, as many as 18 are men. The 3 women are me, as editor of the volumes for 1422 to 61, Vivian Larmony, working in the Civil War period, and Catherine Ricks as assistant editor on the 1832 to 68 section. Catherine has recently published an important monograph on parties, agents and electoral culture, 1880 to 1910, and she's an excellent role model for the future. Clearly, we've come a long way since Wedgwood's time, and attitudes have changed, but this imbalance remains, and I'm not sure why this should be the case. I look forward to hearing your views about it.
Our final paper in this panel is by Professor Caroline Barron, who's Professor Emerita at Royal Holloway, University of London, and who we've already heard a little bit about in this paper. You'll also note that Karen has produced a handout to accompany her paper, and a copy of which we placed on everyone's chairs. There's more at the front here, but I think everyone should do it. Without further ado,
well, thank you, Laura, for inviting me to contribute to this session. It happened because we were sitting in the Institute Common Room. She was at one table and I was at another. We were each having separate discussions with Laura Stroman. And you overheard us talking. Yes. And they wrote to me. So it just shows you how important the Institute Common Room is for all sorts of reasons. And what I think Laura asked me to do was to talk about women historians at London University, and then you said, and there's some personal reminiscences. So that's what we're going to get. Now, have you got the handout? Because I'm quite proud of that. It's my first piece of 20th century research. And it turned out to be much more difficult to do. You know, as a medievalist, you fantasize about how easy it would be to do a 20th century. And this if it writes about women historians at the colleges of London University. And I think what Laura asked me to do was particularly to look at the role of the women's colleges, the three women's colleges, which were Royal Holloway, Bedford and Westfield. And I thought one way I could do this would be to simply to look at the number of women historians in the history departments at all the colleges and see whether the women's colleges did play a particularly significant role. Well, I thought this was going to be easy because there is a publication which some of you who are old enough will remember. It's called The White Pamphlet. Do you remember? Tinty will remember the White Pamphlet. Well, the White Pamphlet was produced by the Board of Studies in History every year, and it told you who was teaching history in the university, at which colleges, what their courses were, and it also included all the lectures and so on that were going on in the Senate House, and the special subjects and optional subjects available. It's a great publication. Well, I went to the archives of the University of London across there in the Senate House, and I said I want to see the run of the White Pamphlet, which they then produced, but they don't have any copies after 1960. So those of you who are in history departments which might have lurking in the secretary's office or something, set after 1960, because the only ones they have go up to 1960. So the first columns here are based on the White Pamphlet. In order, because there wasn't a White Pamphlet after 19, or at least I couldn't get hold of them, I used the Teachers of History series, produced here in the Institute. And I've combined these two to get a long run, from 1920 through to 2015. 1920 is the first White Pamphlet. There is some overlap in the middle years, and I found that the information I got from the Teaching History was the same pretty well as White Pamphlet. So the fact that it's based on two different sources, I think, doesn't invalidate the statistics. Now, if you look at that, I mean, I'd be very interested to know what you all think about this table. There are one or two things I would point out. Firstly, as you obviously know, in the 1960s, the three women's colleges took in men. So that has a factor in it. So although they taught only women up to then, they had men, of course, on their staff as well as women. Also from 1985, Royal Holloway and Bedford College combined. A bit after that, Westfield and Queen Mary College combined, which is why there are the missing columns in the table. And also, University College London and the School of Slavonic East European Studies combined more recently. Now, what I've done, and you can see, is to try to work out how many men and how many women were teaching history in these years I picked. I had to use, not all the series are complete, so I picked years roughly a decade apart, but I don't, and you'll see men and women, and then I've shown the percentage of women overall, which is the bottom line, and in the women's colleges in the bold halfway down the columns. And you will see that there's a very low percentage of women in the history school of London University, ranging, the lowest is 17% in the 1970s, strangely, and gradually rising, but now still only 30% of teachers in the university are women, although there's been a large increase in the number of teachers overall. You'll also see, looking at those figures, the bold figures, that the women's colleges, Bedford, Royal Harrow and Westfield, had significantly higher percentages of women historians teaching than the overall percentage. So in the first year, 33% at Bedford, 80% at Royal Harrow, 100% at Westfield were women, whereas overall it was 18%. There are some things I should be very interested to know what a number of you think about these figures and what you want any conclusion. What is quite striking, I think, is firstly that in the 1930s there was a 30%, quite a high percentage of women. Another interesting statistic, I think, is how low the percentage dropped in the period sort of from 1960 through to 1985, 90. Look at those figures, 18%, 17%, 17%. And then gradually creeping up again, 28%, 30. I offer this to you, I think it's quite interesting. I think also you can see that the women's colleges did provide a forum, a place in which women historians could teach, a higher percentage there. But once they took in men and they merged, they do not have a significantly higher percentage than the other colleges. Another couple of things. Notice that King's College had no women historians between 1938 and 1976. Interesting. King's always was quite a, of course it's completely changed now, but it was quite a traditional college. The London School of Economics had quite a significantly high percentage of women, and whether this is the Eileen Power effect, I don't know, but that's quite interesting. Now, only 2 colleges currently are there equal numbers of men and women. The Courtauld, which maybe is not surprising, where there are more women than men teaching since 1996, and Goldsmiths have equal numbers of men and women. So I'd be interested to know what you would all make of this and what conclusions we might draw and the kind of discussion we might have about that table. Now I'm going to move on to some personal reflections. Let's see how long I've got. Right. There are a number of great women historians, and we've mentioned some of those already. Hilda Johnston, who was the sister-in-law of T.F. Tout, taught at Royal Holloway. Eileen Power was at LSE. Lillian Penson, the first woman vice-chancellor of this university, or any university actually, who was a historian at Bedford, who's the lady on the left in that photograph. Joan Hussey, who was the head of the history department at Royal Holloway, and May McKissack, of whom we've heard, who headed the history department along with others at Westfield, and who actually was my supervisor in my dissertation. Now, personal reflections. I've come to think, because I hadn't really thought about this before until Laura asked me, I don't think, I have to say, that being a woman has been a disadvantage. What I think has made a difference is being a married woman. And I'm going to just explain a little bit about that. But I had some distinct advantages. One advantage was that my mother, who was American, had a job. And so it was always assumed that I would have a job. There wasn't any, but I didn't have to argue that case, or it wasn't difficult. My mother was a publisher, and my father was as well. And funnily enough, she worked for Constables and worked in Orange Street. And I used to go there to see her. So she published, with Constables, she published children's books. She was a graduate of Vassar College in America. And she always had a job. even after marrying my father, who was an Englishman, in 1936. So I never grew up with any sense that there would be any problem for me in trying to have a job and to work. And my husband accepted that. My father was worried because he thought my husband would be, fiancé as he then was, didn't really understand how difficult it was going to be to be married to me. He took him aside and gave him, like he said, she won't be the sort of wife who gets out your slippers and cooks you supper. And he said he had observed that. So I want to say one thing. The things I'm going to say about being married are nothing to do with him. Those of you who knew my husband, John, will know that he was immensely encouraging. I never had any problem in trying to work alongside with him. He really wanted things even more for me than I wanted them for myself. Just to give you an example, when I was working my thesis, which took me 7 years, about halfway through, all my friends were having children, and I thought, well, maybe I'll give this up and have some children. He said, you're not giving it up. I'm not having the mother of my children, a woman who didn't finish her PhD. And I actually think sometimes the person you marry has to want it more than you want it for yourself. That's quite helpful. Anyway, so this is not about John, my husband. This is about certain situations which I think being married altered the perspective a little bit. Now I'm going to give you 4 examples where I think being a married woman historian made a difference. Firstly, when you left university, when I graduated, you could get, I think it was called a postgraduate studentship or something like that, which was given by the British Academy of Ministry. Anyway, I got one of those and I started to work in main Chisholm. Because I was married, I was paid £250 as opposed to the £400 that I would have had if I'd not been married. And I'm not quite sure whether if I had been a man and married, I would have got £400. Anyway, I got less. That was, one thing about being married. The next thing was that I applied to King's for a postgraduate studentship. I'd done 2 years of research, and these were, it's called a postgraduate tutorial studentship where and I was interviewed, and I didn't get it. And the person who got it was a man called John Palmer, who was 2 years ahead of me, very able. I wanted to get it, but I thought, well, fair enough. He was more senior to me. He had already finished his doctorate, and I hadn't. As it happened, there was a lecture actually by John David Knowles at Bedford College, and we were having tea beforehand. In those days, everybody came to Bedford lectures because they were very good cheese scones. Anyway, and A.G. Dickens, who was the professor at King's, was there, and he saw me, and he came up to me, and he obviously felt he needed to say something about why they hadn't given me the job. That's probably a mistake. And he said, well, I'm very sorry we didn't give you the job. And I said, well, yes, I was sorry too. And he said, but we thought the man needed it more. And that was quite, I felt like saying to him, well, if you're going to give jobs on need, say so in the first. Because, anyway, so I didn't get it, but I think he may have thought that was a kind way of saying it, but I was slightly annoyed at the time. Then, when I had children, and we didn't get maternity leave, you just had to sort of do the best you could. However, now I'm going to talk about 1980. My husband John got a visiting professorship in America at the college. And I wanted to go with him and take my children. And I asked my head of department if I could go and pay somebody to do my teaching. And he wasn't happy about that. And he said he wasn't going to give me permission, but I could go and see the principal and ask if I could go. And the principal was a man called John Black. And I went to see him. I put the case on why I needed to go with my husband and children. And he said to me, that he would give me permission to go because he thought that Bedford College had been founded to help women to be educated, and it wasn't the place of the college to stand in the way and make it possible for a married woman to go with her husband to marry. I thought, I hadn't expected him to be so supportive, but he was. So I went and somebody did my teaching. But that was, having to go and make the case in that way was quite, well, it was hard, but it was all right. And finally, I would say that, again, when John moved to Oxford, to become head of Oxford College, that meant obviously moving to Oxford as well. By this time, Bedford had merged with Royal Holloway, so I was teaching at Royal Holloway to Egham. So this meant commuting from Oxford to Egham, which wasn't ideal, but on the other hand, I thought, there are plenty of people who would like to have the job I have. I'm not going to complain about this. So I commuted. But one thing that meant was that because I lived quite a way away from the college and commuted, I couldn't be a head of department. Now, many people would say, well, that's no loss, you want to be a head of department. But being a head of department is a necessary stepping stone in management in order to move on to other jobs. So I'm not complaining about this, but I'm saying that actually, if you can't have experience being head of department, you're not likely to be able to be appointed to other jobs that might be interesting to do because you haven't had management experience. I'm just giving you some examples of how one's life is shaped by the circumstances in which you find yourself. But being a woman was not the key thing. It was trying to harmonize and work, being married and having children. So this is not in any way a complaint or any sort of, I feel I've been immensely fortunate. I had an incredibly good education at a girls' school. I went to Somerville where I was very, very well taught. I had a very good supervisor here in London, Ray McKizzard. I feel I've been immensely fortunate in being able to do and to study, and particularly I think, London University is a particularly advantageous place to be because it's got a lot of colleges, there are a lot of different places, different institutions. You can be married to somebody and be in, John worked at University College and at King's Institute of Classical Studies, I was at Bedford. It gave us opportunities to work with each other, but in a great institution, which is London University. I'm very grateful to the IHR for all the opportunities it provided for me. And I'm very grateful for the colleagues, men and women, whom I've worked with as a historian. And I think, so as we talk about women historians, I would say that being a woman has not been the most crucial thing, but I do think being married and working out how you combine these things has been challenging, but in the end, immensely rewarding.